My relationship with my family became even weaker after I moved out and bought my own house. When they saw the house, they took legal action, demanding I give it to my sister. They lost the case and ended up owing $15,000. I've been thinking about this for a long time, wondering if I need advice or just want to share my feelings. I've always felt unloved by my family. I have a sister, Amy, who is 6 years younger than me. We've never gotten along. When she was born, it felt like everything got worse. My parents seemed to focus all their attention on her. She was the golden child, and I was treated like I didn't matter. Maybe I'm overreacting, but looking back, things were clearly unfair. Take last Christmas, for example. Amy got a brand new PS5, something I had wanted for a long time. Meanwhile, my only gift was a pair of plain white socks from Walmart. It's not about the socks themselves. It's the fact that they were the only gift I got. While everyone else was happy and celebrating, Amy was tearing through her many gifts like it was her personal holiday. The house was filled with excitement for her, and I just sat there, trying to smile in my new socks, completely ignored. Sadly, this kind of thing isn't unusual. It's how my whole life has been. My family doesn't even remember my birthday. The last time they celebrated it was when I turned 11. Since then, it's been forgotten. Last year, I quietly celebrated with my college friends because I didn't get a single call, message, or email from my parents. On the other hand, Amy's birthdays are a huge deal. For her 17th birthday, my parents threw a big party with family and friends, hired entertainers and magicians, set up a trampoline, and had professional catering. The house was completely decorated. It felt more like a festival than a birthday. I wasn't even invited to Amy's birthday party. I only found out the day before when I asked my parents about it. They clearly told me they didn't want me there. At the time, I was busy with my studies, so I decided to spend the day with friends to distract myself. Still, even when I was with my family, I felt like I didn't belong. The loneliness was hard to ignore. When my birthday came around this year, I had a small bit of hope that maybe things would be different. I wasn't expecting much, but I thought they might at least remember me. Nothing changed. I spent the day with my college friends again. They threw a small, fun party in the dorm, which was nice, but it wasn't the same as celebrating with family. Birthdays, even small ones, are special when spent with family. Amy's birthdays always remind me of what I'm missing. I remember her 11th birthday when my parents decorated the whole house with a pirate theme. For my own 11th birthday, I was just happy to have pizza. It's not about the gifts or the parties. It's about feeling like I matter. I've always worked hard, kept up good grades, and stayed out of trouble, but it felt like none of that mattered. Amy is different from me. She's outgoing, great at sports, and always the center of attention. My parents were so happy when she was born. I remember being excited too. I imagined we'd be close, playing games and being best friends like in the movies. But it didn't turn out that way. Amy wasn't interested in spending time with me. She preferred being with her friends and doing things that made her stand out. As I grew older, I started to feel resentment toward her. At first, I told myself it wasn't her fault, but I began to notice how she used her influence. My parents never blamed her for anything. If something went wrong, I was the one who got in trouble. One time, Amy broke the TV when her friends were over. Somehow, it fell off the stand and nearly shattered. When my parents came home, Amy pointed at me and said it was my fault. They believed her and didn't even question it. It was just another reminder of how little I mattered in their eyes. I wasn't even home when the TV broke, but my parents believed Amy and punished me instead. I was grounded for a month, and they took away my phone. They treated me like a criminal. After that, I withdrew from my family. I spent most of my time in my room or at friends' houses. I desperately wanted to leave home, but every time I returned, I felt more and more invisible. My room was small and felt suffocating. It was nothing like Amy's, which was filled with the latest gadgets and decorated with posters of her favorite sports teams. Her room felt like her own little kingdom, while mine was just a shadowy corner of the house. My 19th birthday was especially painful. I had hoped it might be a fresh start now that I was an adult, but I was wrong. The day began like any other. My mom was busy in the kitchen, My dad was buried in the newspaper, and Amy was playing on her new Xbox. Nobody said happy birthday. There were no gifts, no acknowledgement, nothing. I felt completely ignored. In that moment, I realized nothing would ever change. Amy was always the center of attention, and I was left out. Whether she knew it or not, her actions made me resent her even more. I decided I needed to take control of my life. I distanced myself from my parents and avoided being around Amy's obvious favoritism. Being ignored by my family was emotionally draining, so I cut contact as much as possible. As soon as I could, I moved out and started living with friends from university. The move felt like a huge relief, like I was finally free. To support myself, I started freelancing in graphic design. At first, it was just to make ends meet, but over time, I built a reputation for my work. I got more clients, received great feedback, and worked on bigger projects. I put in long hours, often staying up late and working on weekends, determined to succeed on my own. By the time I was 25, my hard work paid off, and my life took a positive turn. I met someone named Jerry, and he was everything I had been looking for in a partner. He was smart, ambitious, and kind-hearted. Jerry was also a freelancer, managing social media for small and medium businesses. We hit it off immediately and began working on projects together. We supported each other and grew in our careers. For the first time, I felt truly valued and cared for. I wasn't just someone in the background to Jerry. He truly understood me and loved me for who I was, not for what I could do for him. His care came from genuine feelings, not out of obligation. As our careers became more stable, we started dreaming of a bigger future together. After a year of dating, we decided to move in together. Everything was going well, and we made a bold plan to use our savings to buy a home. We didn't want just any house. We wanted something special. After a long search, we found a beautiful 4-story house in the suburbs. It was more expensive than we had planned, but with our combined income, we managed to afford it. It truly felt like our dream home, a result of our teamwork and hard work. We signed the papers and became the official owners. 4 days later, the trouble started. I got a call from my family. At first, I didn't want to answer it. Since moving out, I had barely spoken to them, and every conversation felt awkward. But the calls didn't stop, so I finally picked up. They said, "We're in town and want to visit your new home." I wasn't sure how to feel, but decided to let them come, thinking it was better to get it over with and avoid them forever. A few hours later, my parents, Amy, and a man I didn't recognize showed up at the door. That's when things got weird. Amy introduced the man as her fiancé, Douglas, and also revealed she was pregnant. I was shocked. I didn't even know she was engaged, let alone expecting a baby. It felt like a wake-up call about how distant I had become from my family. Before they even stepped inside, my dad made a snarky comment. "So, this is the house you bought? I didn't think you could afford something like this." His tone was condescending, but I chose to ignore it. I wasn't in the mood to argue. Once inside, the atmosphere became even more awkward. My mom tried making small talk with Jerry, but he quickly picked up on the tension and glanced at me, clearly sensing something was wrong. Meanwhile, my dad and Amy were whispering to each other, and Douglas was walking around like the house was his. Then, out of nowhere, my dad spoke up in a firm and unexpected way, making the situation even stranger. My father said arrogantly, "I think it makes sense for Amy and Douglas to move in here to build their family and make room for the baby." I was so shocked I couldn't even speak. He went on, ignoring how upset I was. "This house is too big for you and Jerry. Amy and Douglas really need a place like this to raise a child. You two don't need all this space." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Then he looked me in the eye and said something that made my blood boil. "This is no joke. It's time for you to step aside. You should give up what your sister needs. Family comes first, and she's starting a new family. You and Jerry can find a smaller place. This house is more suitable for them." I felt devastated. Years of bottled-up resentment poured out. "This home belongs to Jerry and me. We bought it, and it's in our names. No one gets to make decisions for us." Amy smirked and added, "Wait a minute. Why do you even need such a big house? Unlike you, we have a baby on the way. That was the last straw. I snapped. The issue isn't the size of the house. The problem is that you're trying to take something that's mine and claim it as your own. My voice was shaking with anger. I've put up with this kind of treatment my whole life, and I'm done with it. My father suddenly became aggressive. He stood up, puffed out his chest, and said, "You should be grateful. It's shameful to live in a house that's beyond your means. If you give it to Amy, she won't have to feel that way. Besides, they're not demanding the keys, they're just asking. Whether you like it or not, this house becoming Amy's is inevitable." That was it. I couldn't hold back anymore. I exploded with rage, lunging at him and pinning him against the wall. "Get out of this house right now," I shouted. Jerry tried to calm me down, but I couldn't stop. Years of frustration and anger were pouring out. My father pushed back, and before I knew it, we were yelling and physically fighting. My mother and Amy were screaming, and Douglas stood in the corner frantically, making a phone call. The chaos didn't stop until the police arrived. It was Douglas who had called them. The situation spiraled out of control, and the police had to separate us. They handcuffed both my father and me and took us to the police car. I never thought things would come to this. I never expected my father to try and take my home from me. And now, it had ended in a way I could never have imagined. I ended up in jail, but Jerry came and paid my bail hours later. Even though I was free, the damage was done. My family was completely broken. But things weren't over yet. They got worse. My father decided to sue me for the house, claiming that Amy and Douglas needed it more than I did. He actually took me to court, demanding I hand over the house. I was shocked by how far he was willing to go. I hired a lawyer and gathered every document proving the house was mine. I prepared for what felt like the biggest battle of my life. But I had more to bring to court than just paperwork. Over the years, I had endured emotional and psychological abuse from my family, and I decided it was time to speak up. I collected evidence, emails, text messages, and even testimonies from friends who had seen how my parents treated me. When the trial began, my lawyer not only argued that the house was legally mine, but also highlighted the neglect and emotional abuse I had suffered. My father tried to make himself look like a caring parent, saying he was only trying to do what was best for the family. Amy and Douglas acted like victims, claiming they needed the house for their baby and calling me selfish for not giving it up. But their story didn't hold up. After months of hearings, the verdict was finally announced. The court ruled in my favor, confirming the house was legally mine. On top of that, the judge ordered my father to pay $150,000 in damages for the years of emotional abuse. For the first time in my life, I felt like justice had been served. Someone had finally stood up for me. After the trial, I made the decision to cut off all contact with my parents and Amy. I couldn't take the manipulation, lies, and favoritism anymore. Together with Jerry, I started a new chapter. We made the house truly ours and began building the life we wanted. Though the scars from the past hadn't completely healed, I felt a sense of peace I had never known before. Now, for years have passed since all of this happened. Looking back, it's still hard to believe how much my parents tried to deceive and manipulate me, but that was my reality. Amy had once been the favored child, but things have changed. Before I go on, I want to tell you about our wedding, which happened 4 years ago. It was the happiest day of my life and the best decision I've ever made. After everything I went through with my family, Jerry stood by me through it all. The court battle confirmed what I already knew. Jerry was the one person I could truly rely on. I could truly trust Jerry. We had a small, simple wedding with just his close friends and family. I didn't invite my parents, sister, or any of my family members. After everything they had put me through, the manipulation, abuse, and even suing me, I didn't want their toxic behavior to ruin my special day. By then, I had fully come to terms with their true nature. A few days after the wedding, I got a long email from my mother. It was full of guilt-tripping, saying how hurt she was about not being invited. I don't even know how she found out about the wedding. My father didn't contact me at all, which I was fine with. But Amy? She completely lost her composure. which wasn't surprising. Amy had always been the golden child, the one who could do no wrong in our parents' eyes. She never took responsibility for her mistakes and always blamed others. Even though the court ruling and the $150,000 payment affected my parents financially, they weren't completely ruined. But their finances took a big hit, and they couldn't live as comfortably as before. Amy, who had been spoiled her entire life, couldn't handle this new reality. She believed she had a right to inherit my father's house, but that wasn't going to happen. She started demanding large sums of money, but those demands went unmet. Her life began to fall apart. A few months after the trial, her fiancé Douglas left her. Not long after that, Amy reportedly had a miscarriage due to the stress she was under. Somehow, it all felt like it was being blamed on me. My father losing the lawsuit, the financial troubles, and even Douglas leaving Amy. It seemed like everything was being pinned on me. Then, everything took a shocking turn. About a month into my marriage, Jerry and I were settling into our new life and enjoying the peace of being free from family drama. One day, we decided to go for a walk in the neighborhood. The air was crisp and the streets were quiet. It was supposed to be a relaxing day. As we walked, we suddenly saw Amy standing on a corner, staring at me with pure anger in her eyes. My heart dropped. I hadn't seen her since the trial, and I couldn't understand why she was there. Confused, I yelled, "What are you doing here?" Before I could process what was happening, she charged at me. In her hand was an iron rod, probably taken from a nearby construction site. I screamed and tried to back away, but she was too fast. She swung the rod and hit me in the abdomen. Before I could react, pain shot through me like fire burning through my ribs. I bent over, gasping for air, but Amy wasn't finished. She swung the rod again, this time hitting my left shin. The sickening sound of the impact was followed by me collapsing onto the sidewalk. "You ruined my life," Amy screamed, trembling with rage. "It's all your fault. You caused Dad's financial collapse, you made Douglas leave, and you broke everything." I tried to get up and defend myself, but my body wouldn't cooperate. My strength was gone, and I couldn't move properly. The world around me became a blur, but I could hear voices getting louder and footsteps rushing toward us. Someone grabbed Amy and pulled her away, but I was too weak to understand what was happening. My consciousness faded. When I woke up, I was in a hospital bed. Jerry was sitting beside me, his face pale and his eyes filled with tears. I tried to speak, but my throat was dry and every part of my body ached. "Are you okay?" Jerry whispered, gripping my hand tightly. "I'm okay," I managed to say, but I wasn't. I had multiple broken ribs, a fractured left leg, and a broken right arm. The doctor told me I was lucky to be alive. If bystanders hadn't stepped in when they did, Amy might have killed me. The police were called, and Amy was arrested on the spot while I lay bleeding on the sidewalk. After that, I drifted in and out of consciousness, heavily sedated by pain medication. As my body began to heal, Jerry stayed by my side the entire time. He handled everything: police reports, insurance claims, and hiring a lawyer to prepare for the upcoming trial. Amy was facing serious charges, including assault with a deadly weapon. Because of the severity of my injuries, she was looking at a long prison sentence. When I was finally awake and able to understand everything, Jerry explained what had happened. Amy, after being abandoned by Douglas, had a complete mental breakdown. She fell into deep depression and refused to accept responsibility for her situation. Instead, she blamed everything on me. According to the police report, Amy had waited outside my house for hours and grabbed the iron rod from a nearby construction site to attack me. When questioned by the police, she showed no regret. She justified her actions by claiming that I had destroyed her life and said she was only seeking justice. She truly believed she was in the right. Amy believed I was the cause of all her problems, her fiancé leaving, and our father's financial troubles. I spent a long and painful time in the hospital recovering from my injuries. Every day was tough, with constant physical therapy, medical checkups, and the looming stress of the trial. I couldn't walk for long periods, and even after being discharged, I had to use crutches and arm support. The doctors warned me that it could take months to recover fully, and there was a chance I might never regain all my strength. After months of treatment and recovery, the trial against Amy finally began. She pleaded not guilty, holding on to the belief that her actions were justified. She insisted that I was to blame for everything that led her to act the way she did. Her defense argued that her mental state was fragile due to family issues, but the evidence against her was strong. Eyewitnesses testified that they saw Amy attack me and immediately called the police. Medical reports detailed the severity of my injuries, and police evidence showed that her attack was planned. She had waited outside my house and brought the iron rod with her to harm me. It was clear this wasn't a random act of frustration, but an intentional act of violence. Sitting in court and listening to my sister try to justify her actions was more painful than anything I'd been through before. She never once looked at me. To her, it was as if I didn't exist anymore. The worst part was seeing my parents in the courtroom. Not only were they there, but they sat on Amy's side. Every time she claimed I had ruined her life, they nodded in agreement. Their silent support for her felt like a knife twisting in my chest. Despite everything, they chose her side, still believing she was the victim. The trial lasted several weeks, but the outcome seemed clear from the start. With the evidence and testimonies presented, the verdict was almost inevitable. Amy was found guilty of serious assault and sentenced to 6 years in prison, with a possibility of parole in 4 years. By that point, her sentence didn't matter much to me. I had already accepted that I no longer had a family. Through this experience, I realized that those who were supposed to love and support me weren't true family at all. The one constant in my life was Jerry. He stood by me through everything, never wavering. He faced every difficult situation with strength and was always there to support me. Together, we've focused on moving forward, leaving the pain of the past behind, and building a positive future. I am slowly recovering, both physically and mentally, and I'm beginning to see a brighter future ahead. I go to therapy regularly to help me work through the trauma of what happened, but it's a slow and long process. Some days I feel good about my progress and can appreciate how far I've come. Other days are harder, and it's tough to look in the mirror because I feel so different from the person I used to be. I don't know what the future holds, but I've decided to take each day as it comes and make the most of it. One thing I'm sure of now is who I can truly trust.